Welcome to the Online Business Launchpad podcast. I'm your host, Trudy Rankin. And in this episode, I'm going to walk you through the process that I use to decide which software to buy for my business. Now, I've developed this process over the years, starting out when I was in Chief Information Officer type roles. When I was in CIO roles, we would often spend thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars on enterprise level software. And it meant that we had to make sure we got it right. We had to make the right choices because you can't afford to spend that much money and get it wrong. And over the years, I've refined the process for myself and for other small business owners who only have themselves or a small team to help make the decision for which piece of software to buy. I'm going to go through that process, and I'm going to use a recent example of choosing a specific piece of software from my own business, which I'll explain in just a little bit. So let's get stuck in. Now, step one is to sit down and take the time to become really clear about what job you want this software to do for your business. What are the things that it has to accomplish for you? And so you're going to take the time to develop a bullet point list, and you're going to write down all of the criteria, all of the little tasks that you need it to do. And once you've got those listed down, I found it helpful to turn it into a spreadsheet, because when you go through and evaluate all the different choices that you have, it's going to make it easier for you to track which ones tick the boxes and which ones don't. And that's what I did. I developed a spreadsheet that helped me keep track of what I discovered during my research. And then I went back at the end of it and used it to tell me which one was the right software candidate for my needs. Okay, step two. This is a step that I think is actually really helpful, because we used to do it, as I said, when I was working in CIO roles, but I also found it helpful this time, and that is to reach out to other people or other businesses who are using similar types of software to what it is that you're looking at buying, and ask them what they're using and how to go. So what I did was I reached out to my fellow SPI Pro community members, so that's Smart Passive Income Pro community members, and I asked them for help. And basically, you might think, why didn't I just search on Google and find out, put in what best X software for blah. But the reason I didn't do that was because I actually wanted recommendations from people who have actually used these particular tools. And that means a whole lot more to me than some blurb about a scheduler that's managed to get their tool ranked really high on Google because they're good at SEO. I wanted the hard facts from people who have used something and they have some pros and some cons about what the software can do and what it can't do. So basically, I just posted something along the lines of, hey, I'm hoping somebody can provide me with a recommendation for a replacement for Buffer, because I was using Buffer and I need to regularly post on LinkedIn and Facebook, but LinkedIn keeps crashing and the posts won't work, which affects the number of podcast listens I get, which is frustrating. What social media post scheduling tools do you use, and why? Do they have the same problems with the LinkedIn interface, or is that just a Buffer thing? And so basically, I just made it really clear when I was reaching out what the problem was, what I was using, and asking them if they could give me recommendations. And it was really cool because I did get quite a lot of recommendations back. And so then for you, if you reach out to people, you can do it there might be groups on Facebook that you can reach out to, or Facebook groups in LinkedIn. You might be part of a community that you could reach out and ask in terms of the software. Just making sure that you're asking people who have used something similar to what it is you're looking at. So step three is the process of collecting the names of potential candidates. And so for me, it took a little while to collect all the information because I got a really quick burst of information back. And then over the next couple of weeks, people who hadn't seen the post before kept popping back with more suggestions of pieces of software that they thought might be suitable, which was really helpful. So I ended up with quite a good list, and I'll just very quickly explain to you. So the ones that were on the list were Recur Post, Social Bee, Promo Republic, Social Pilot, Sprout Social, Hootsuite, Later, Metricool, Meet Edgar, and of course, Buffer, because Buffer was the one that I was using that I was happy with because it wasn't doing what I needed it to do. crashing is not a good look, even if it's not the fault of your particular software. If it crashes and doesn't work, that's not helpful. Okay, step 4. Once you've collected your potential candidates and you've had a chance to make up a bit of a list, this is where your spreadsheet comes in useful. If you've listed down the criteria down one side, then across the top, you can list all of the different candidates that you have been told about and that you've identified. And you basically are going to step by step. It's a tedious process because it takes quite a lot of effort to go into each website, look at the website and go, what do they say about the sorts of things that I need from the software? And the trick is that you will probably phrase your needs in language that's different to the way they phrase them on their website. And if they're not dialed into who you are as a customer, their language is going to be quite off. And you might have to do a lot of guessing about what it is they actually mean, which can be tricky because sometimes you don't know for sure what they're saying is what you actually need. So you might have to do quite a lot of toing and froing back and forth until you've actually nailed whether or not that piece of software can do what you need it to do for a particular type of task. Okay, step 5. And step 5 is a little bit messy in some respects because it's partly tied to step 4, but it's a step beyond that as well. So you're going to go back, and once you've filled out your spreadsheet and looked at all of the different pieces of software and evaluated them against the criteria that you have, then you have to go through and have some sort of scoring system that says, hey, yes, this thing ticks the box, or no, it ticked the box, or it ticks it this much, but not the rest. And so for me, I just used a really simple yes, no question mark. It either ticked the box, I simply not find out from the website whether it did or didn't. So in terms of what I discovered, I was a little bit surprised. In fact, I was surprised at how little information there was on some of the websites. Some of the websites didn't even have fact pages or FAQ pages, and it was obvious to look for answers. But for the websites with good information about functionality, I quickly discovered that I needed to update my criteria list. Now, why is that? It turned out that there was a bunch of things that some of the schedulers can do that I'd not even thought of needing. You're going to need to do the same thing. When you start your research, you're going to discover that there's some stuff that you might not have known about. And so you have to go back and update your spreadsheet. And then you'll have to go back and update the information for all the sites that you've already checked. And that's what I had to do. I had to go back and do some more work just to fill in the gaps once I discovered there was actually more functionality than I'd realized. And then I finally filled out the spreadsheet with all the information that I could find on all the different tools I'd been told about. And then as I looked at everything that was there, I went back in and added another column to the spreadsheet that indicated which pieces of functionality were absolute must-haves. Why did I do that? Because just looking at that much data, it can get super confusing really quickly, especially if you have question marks in columns and you're going, I'm not sure the way they described it, whether or not it actually does that or not. And so I went back in and I basically asterisked each piece of functionality that was an absolute must-have. And if it wasn't there, if they didn't have it, then that meant that it was a no-go for that particular schedule. And by doing that step, by going in, I started out with my little list of things that I thought I needed to have, then I added to it because I found out there was more stuff that these pieces of software could do, and then shrank the list back down again by saying, hang on, I need it. It absolutely has to do these things. If it can't do these things, then it's just an absolute no. So using that process, I was able to very rapidly cut out all of the scheduling tools that exceeded my reasonable cost criteria. Now, reasonable cost was one of my key criteria, and there's no point in paying a ton of money for a piece of software that just doesn't fit your budget, that just is silliness and doesn't make sense. But some of the tools that I looked at had really amazing functionality. But as I looked at the functionality versus budget, I realized that it was way more functionality than I needed. And I've learned the hard way as both a CIO and a small business owner that buying functionality that you might quotes need at some stage in the future, it's just simply throwing money into a black hole. You might get to that stage someday, but in the meantime, you'll have spent a couple of or more years paying for functionality that you're not using, and so it's just wasted money. The only caveat to this is you're in a situation where if you do grow enough in the near future to need that extra functionality, and the cost of changing platforms is more than it costs you to pay for the pricier option, then by all means go for the pricier option. But it's always difficult to know which way things will go. And in situations like these, crystal balls would be nice. Now, a couple of other things that I noted as I was going through the research process and the evaluation process, and that there was, and this is specifically about the fact that I'm looking at a social media scheduler tool. And I've already told you about the extra functionality, which was cool. But there was one thing there that I just thought, oh, why did I not know this? I should have known this already. But some of the tools will let you build libraries of content, which you can use to schedule posts on an evergreen basis. And that, for me, that was new, at least when I was, focusing on buffer. They had a very limited, at least at the stage that I was looking at what it could do and what it couldn't do, it wouldn't let you schedule a particular post more than twice, I think, at some stage. Now, they may have changed it in the last little while, but the way that they are describing the other pieces of software were describing this type of capability, it was actually quite interesting and exciting to realize, hey, that's something that I want to be able to do. So that's going to be something that I'm going to be looking for in all of the pieces of software. And the other thing that I realized was that it felt like all of the software seemed really expensive on a per month basis. So I went back and actually checked to see what it is on a yearly basis, and that actually helped bring the cost down. So it's always quite useful to look at paying for something a year at a time to see if you can save yourself some money. Okay. All right. So if it's helpful, I'm just going to really quickly go through what my original criteria was. And my original criteria were that I needed to be able to post in some specific social media accounts. So LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, Pinterest. I was going to be using Twitter, but then it's turned into X. So I'm not so sure about that anymore. But when I started, those were the ones that I wanted to be able to post in. And I ended up with some must-haves, which I wanted to make sure it wouldn't crash with LinkedIn all the time. I wanted to be able to build libraries of content. I want to be able to post content on an evergreen repeating basis. And then I realized as I was going through and looking at functionality that I also wanted to be able to post on Google Business Profile. That was something that I hadn't been doing before. And I thought, oh, that makes a lot of sense. And I also wanted to be able to have the functionality used by myself and a couple of other team members without having to share accounts. So if that makes sense, I'm security conscious when it comes to sharing account details, and it's good if each member can have their own login to the account. As I mentioned before, another must-have was that it had to be affordable. I was looking at around $50 a month. I wanted it to be relevant around I wanted it to be affordable and cost-effective for what I'm using it for, which I think is reasonable. I wanted to make analytics and reports available, and I needed to be able to schedule a certain number of daily posts and a certain number of stored recurring updates. And then something that is important these days, and especially more so, is that it needs to be able to integrate with Canva and Zapier, if that's a possibility. It needs an inbox for managing comments and engagements, and it needs to be able to have a social media calendar. So those were the things that ended up actually being important. And then I ended up adding in, after starting the research, having a bulk scheduling capability of 50 posts at a time. Now, ended up with some nice to haves, which started out being in the nice to haves, and then some of them I ended up moving across to the must haves. So after I went through all of the research and looked at what new functionality was there, this is my final must-have criteria list. It's not allowed to crash the link with LinkedIn all the time, or ever if possible. Need to be able to build libraries of content, post content on an evergreen basis. I want to be able to post on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, Pinterest, YouTube, and Google Business Profile. I did have Twitter, but I'm not so sure about X. I'm not so sure I want to use it anymore. And I want to be able to use the account for myself and at least 2 other team members without having to share account details such as passwords, because I think that becomes a security risk when that's the case. So there's some back-end functionality that's pretty important there in terms of account sharing. It needs to be affordable at around $50 a month, as paid on an annual basis, although this could stretch up to $80 a month if the functionality warrants it. Needs to make analytics and reports available, be able to schedule up to 20 posts on a daily basis, and up to 500 recurring updates. These are the evergreen posts that I was referring to earlier. Needs to integrate with Zapier and Canva and allow for bulk scheduling of up to 50 posts at a time. Needs to have a social content calendar. And one of the things that I added as I went through was that it needs to have an affiliate program. Why do you want an affiliate program? Because if I use a tool a lot and it's doing a good job for me, I want to be able to tell other people about it and refer other people to it. And so having an affiliate program makes a really good incentive and a nice way of sharing about the program and what a good job it's doing. So that got added to the list. Now, step 6, making the final decision, which is a lot of work right up until then. But step 6, making the final decision, actually went pretty quickly, because by then I had all of the information there, had it all laid out, and I was able to go through quite quickly and decide which ones did not actually meet my criteria. If they didn't meet my criteria, if they didn't meet one or more of my top criteria, particularly around affordability, ability to post evergreen content, individual team member access, or not be able to post on YouTube, basically they just missed the cut. They just got chopped out immediately. And some of the schedulers that I reviewed simply missed out because their website didn't say whether a particular functionality was available or not. That was a bit of an oops on their part, because if you don't have the information, you can't make a decision. All right, so I'm just going to really briefly explain my top 4 choices and why I chose them. I'm just going to work a little bit backwards here and just tell you, number 4 was Social Bee. And the reason it was number 4 was because it wasn't clear whether some of the required functionality was available, but based on what other people had told me, I figured it probably was. So I left it on my list as a maybe. It didn't tick as many boxes as a couple of the others, but it was more affordable at $49 a month. Now that's $49 US. You got to take that into account. Number 3 on my list was Recur Post. And initially it didn't fit my criteria of affordable, but I had to go back and reconsider later when another scheduler ticked all the boxes as well, but it did, this is Recur Post, did roll in at around the same price range of just under $80 a month US. Now, Social Pilot was number 2 on the list, and it ticks all the boxes, but it was more expensive at $78 a month if you pay it on a yearly basis. So that one and Recur Post, Social Pilot and Recur Post were starting to get up there price-wise, which was starting to get a little bit ouch my budget. I have other pieces of software that I use, and I try to keep my software costs down as much as I can. Now, my number 1 choice ended up being something called Metricool, and it ended up ticking all the boxes, not just the ones that I needed, but a whole bunch of the nice to haves as well. And it had a really great price of $45 a month, which actually I thought was really good. I'd never heard of Metricool before, so when I saw that it was coming top of the list, I was really intrigued. And so I jumped onto YouTube to see if I could find out a bit more about it and whether people would find it useful or not. And I came across a video that did a review of the pros and cons after this guy had been using it for 6 months, and he'd learned enough to feel comfortable trying it out. And I listened to what he had to say and I went, yep, that sounds really good. And I think that this is going to do the job for me. And so we are now in the process of signing up for Metricool, and we'll get back to you with an update on how we like it after we've been using it for a while. But if you're interested in that link to that YouTube video of the guy doing the review, I'll put the link up in the show notes so that you can go and watch it. Just a really helpful review. So I thought I'll pop that in there. I'm just going to very quickly go back through the steps that I have in my process that I use so that you've got it there for you to be able to use when you're choosing your own software. So the first step is to set your criteria, decide what it is that you want your software to do for your business, and be as detailed as you possibly can, and try to give it a little bit of a rating in terms of must have, nice to have. And then step 2, you want to reach out and see what other people are using and what they have to say about the things that they're using, the software that they're using. Step 3, collect up all the potential candidates, get them down on a list. Step 4, create a spreadsheet or something, whatever tool you use to actually decide, but you want to be able to list all of your possibilities. And then you want to be able to just check to see how well each of the possibilities actually ticks the boxes in terms of the things that you need it to do. Step 5, you want to go back and review your research results and start filling in gaps. If you have gaps, you might need to go away and do a little bit more research. And once you've done that and filled in the gaps, if you discovered any extra functionality like I did, then you can actually go ahead and add that in as well. And then you're going to go back through and you're going to go, okay, that's fine. Started out with this, got this extra functionality. And now what's absolutely critical? What do I absolutely have to have in order to be able to use this software the way I need to use it? Use those as your way of going through and doing your final evaluation. Go through and start scratching out candidates that don't meet your criteria. So as I said, I ended up with 4 pieces of absolutely must-have top criteria, and that allowed me to get rid of probably 80% of the potential candidates that were there. Then once you've got down to a short list, I had a short list of 4, go through those and use that as a way of making a choice about which one you want to use. Once you've made a decision, you should celebrate, give yourself a bit of a celebratory clap on the back, because this is a hard process. It's a painful process. And once you've done that, you can, with a whole lot of confidence, go ahead and sign up for the software package that you've decided that you're going to choose. So I hope that's been helpful. And if you'd like to download the checklist for this process, you can go to onlinebusinessliftoff.com. So once again, that's onlinebusinessliftoff.com/software checklist. And I just hope it's helpful. So take care, and I'll see you next time.